I got to imagine this is a little bit like what David felt, as he's leading the procession, bringing the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem, and he's, woo! And he's dancing and he's singing, woo! Making a right fool of himself, but that's okay. That's okay. I love the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord can be so many things, and it's all good. As I was preparing for this week's message, he gave me a really, really good word. It's actually a little bit tied to the word we had a couple weeks ago. Now, remember we were talking about it was time for back to school, time for learning, and to effectively learn to be more Christ-like, we had to do more and examine our behaviors. We need to get the heart and the focus of values and attitudes that drive those behaviors. And one of the ways we do that is we learn from the past, lest we be doomed to repeat it. Now, back 2 weeks ago, I gave you the example of Saul. Saul was a perfect example of somebody who doesn't learn. Didn't learn from his mistakes, repeated the same mistakes. But we could have used so many more examples. For example, just about anything regarding the Israelites, from Exodus through Deuteronomy, Judges, keep going, is an example of not learning from the past. Now, there was a time when I was thinking, what have I got to learn from these people other than how to not trust God? How to have absolutely no long-term or short-term memory of the things that God does for you. Because looking back on that, it was like, those fools! Why, if I was back there, I wouldn't have made that same mistake. One thing we definitely can learn from them is that they serve as an example that we are going to face trials and we are going to face temptations, and we need to think about how we are going to react when we are faced with them. With this in mind, the word basically, not just for this week, but for the next 2 weeks, all has to do with a single scripture verse. I'm going to share that with you now. That scripture verse is 1 Corinthians 10:13. There's a lot in this one verse. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, He will show you a way out so that you can endure. All that, one verse. So what we're going to do is going to break it down into manageable bite-sized chunks. The first one being that first sentence. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. And as you see here, this is the message for today. You will face temptations. Underline that word, will. But you are not alone, because the ones you face have been experienced by others. Christians tend to not think of temptation so much. Temptations are for the other guy. Temptations are always it's someone else's problem. No. Temptations are something we all have to deal with. You may look at the news and you think, well, I would never be tempted to do that. There's some pretty bad stuff happening. You say, well, I can easily resist that temptation. But let me ask you this. Were you successful in resisting a temptation to say an angry, hurtful word to someone? Were you successful in resisting the temptation to betray somebody because you saw short-term gain? Were you successful in resisting the temptation to take a shortcut that cost someone something? We are tempted all the time. Sometimes we don't even realize it. But as you face these temptations, the message today is, guess what? You're not alone. Somebody else has gone through this too. Oh, but if you say to yourself, nobody's going through what I'm going through, you're wrong. You're flat out wrong. And we're going to see some of what the Israelites went through is some of the stuff that we are tempted with today. So you're not alone in this temptation. There's one thing, though, we need to get out of the way at the outset, and that's this. God never tempts us to sin, but He will test us. For this, I'm relying on James 1, verse 13. And remember, when you are being tempted, not if you are being tempted, when you are being tempted, it will happen. When you are being tempted, do not say, God is tempting me. God is never tempted to do wrong, and He never tempts anyone else. James 1:13. What is the difference between testing and temptation? Because what's interesting here is in 1 Corinthians 13, that word tempt can also mean test. And it is used interchangeably, not interchangeably, it is used in different ways depending on the context. Let me provide for you an example. This is testing. Numbers 11, verse 1. Soon the people began to complain about the hardship, and the Lord heard everything they said. Then the Lord's anger blazed against them, and He sent a fire to rage among them, and He destroyed some of the people in the outskirts of the camp. The Lord was testing His people. He was seeing, are these people whom I have chosen, who have been part of this covenant that goes all the way back to Abraham, are these people going to do what they said they're going to do? Are they going to do what I want them to do? Are they going to be obedient? I'm going to test them and see if they're going to do that. And so He did. That's one of the reasons why they didn't go from Egypt to the promised land in 1 week. It took a while to get there because they needed to be tested along the ways. What does that testing look like? If you've ever gone on a camp out, you have a tiny taste of a little bit what it's like for the Israelites. They were living basically out of tents. But it wasn't just an overnight thing where you go set up, you sit in your chair, throw out the fishing pole, and snooze. It was marching through the desert. There wasn't a tremendous amount of food available. There wasn't a tremendous amount of water available, and it's hard work. If you've been camping, you know what it's like to pack up all your stuff. That takes a while. We have it easy. We can just throw it in the back of the car and head on out. They didn't have such luxuries. No, they had pack animals they had to load up, and they had to ride or walk. It was a trial. They were being tested, and they failed rather a lot. And Numbers 11:1 is an example of one of their failures in that testing. God was saying, are these people going to do what I ask without complaining? No, they complained a lot. It's one thing to say, man, I am so tired. Man, I'm hungry. We can say, I'm hungry. We can say, I'm tired. We can say, I'm thirsty. But when you start saying, why did you ever lead me out of Egypt? Yeah, I was a slave, but hey, I had all the food I wanted. I had all the water I wanted to drink. Wasn't wandering in the desert. I wish I could go back there. Fail. Epic fail. They did that a lot. They were being tested. They failed. Here's the difference between that and temptation. This example is also Israelites. This is a few chapters down, Numbers 25, verses 1 to 3. While the Israelites were camped at Acacia Grove, some of the men defiled themselves by having sexual relations with local Moabite women. These women invited them to attend sacrifices to their gods. So the Israelites feasted with them and worshipped the gods of Moab. In this way, Israel joined in the worship of Baal of Peor, causing the Lord's anger to blaze against his people. Again. There they were tempted. It's not as if the Israelites did not have enough women. There were plenty of women. But they saw these Moabite women. They said, hey, I want that. And the Moabite women were saying, okay, but here, we have this other God we worship. And he comes with it. Oh, okay, all right, fine. That's a temptation. And it's a temptation because it's something that came out of the flesh. The next point that we need to know about is that we are not exempt. I mentioned this earlier when James says, when you are tempted. It's not a question of if, it's when. Think about it this way. We include here Matthew 4:1. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. If Jesus was tempted, why would we not be tempted? But it didn't stop at Jesus. His disciples were tempted. Matter of fact, Jesus said to them in the Garden of Gethsemane, keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Unless you think, oh, well, that's the disciples. I don't have to worry about that. Think about how Jesus asked us to pray. The question was posed to Jesus, Jesus, how are we supposed to pray? And he said, pray like this. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Sorry, I'm going to be using the King James here. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. That's how we were taught to pray. Not just 2,000 years ago, but today. Most people just use those exact words and figure, okay, that's the prayer. Jesus was talking about a format here. Use that format. But it includes, lead us not into temptation. Jesus would not have included that if it didn't apply to you and to me and to all Christians who've given themselves to Jesus. Of course, if we are not exempt from temptation, what's the next thing we can know? It's this. We are not exempt from falling by giving into temptation. Look at Romans 6:12. Do not let sin control the way you live. Do not give in to sinful desires. So, if we are not exempt, in other words, if we are going to be tempted, and we are, that temptation, as I mentioned earlier, can take various forms, then there is a possibility that you could give into it. It's so easy to do. Paul would not have spent so much time in his letter to the Corinthians talking about temptation and sin and giving in. Wouldn't have spent time talking about this in Romans. Epistle after epistle. It's like, don't give in. Don't give in. We need that reminder because it's easy to give in. It's easy to give up. It's easy to look at short-term gain versus long-term cost. Why? Because the flesh wants what it wants, and it wants it now. I want it now. That money, I want it now. That person, I want them now. That food, that drink, now, now, now. And it's easy to say, okay, without thinking about what happens when you say okay. So where does this come from? That's the next point. Temptation stems from our humanity, i.e. the flesh. James 1:14. Temptation comes from our own desires, from our flesh. What kind of desires? Well, look at how Jesus was tempted. What is the very first temptation the devil threw at him? It was food. He had been fasting for 40 days. We've had fasts here at church. Have you ever tried fasting food, like no food for 40 days? Oh. Your flesh isn't just nudging you, it's screaming at you. Feed me! Doesn't that pizza look good? Driving your car and you're fasting. Oh, Popeye's chicken sandwich sounds awfully good right now. It doesn't always seem that when you're fasting, that's when you see all the ads for these beautiful, delicious, juicy hamburgers. Look at that steak. Oh. Come and have some eggplant parmesan. No! It's coming from our own desires. So Jesus is fasting for 40 days. And what's the first thing the devil hits him with? Food. Why? It's coming from his humanity. It's coming from his flesh. And he's hoping to hit him hard with that one. You think that's not a temptation for Jesus? He is the Son of God. If he really wanted to, he wouldn't have just turned a stone into a piece of bread. I'm thinking 5-course dinner. The devil's going, hey, let's make it easy. Just turn a stone into bread. That's all you got to do. Well, that's a temptation. But he didn't give in. It would have been real easy too. But see, Jesus is looking at the long view. He's got the long-term picture in mind. He knows what the consequence will be if he gives in. The Israelites, temptations tended to hit them in their humanity. For example, when the people saw how long it was taking, Moses is on Mount Sinai, right? He's getting the Ten Commandments from the Lord. And it's taken him a while. And the Israelites have no patience whatsoever. When the people saw how long it was taking Moses to come back down the mountain, they gathered around Aaron. "Come on," they said. "Make us some gods who can lead us." Oh, like that pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night, that's not leading him. The water coming out of a rock, that's not leading him. The Red Sea, parting of the Red Sea, destruction of Egypt's enemy, that's not leading him. No. No memory. "Make us some gods who can lead us. We don't know what happened to this fellow Moses." Like they don't know who Moses is. "Who brought us here from the land of Egypt?" This fellow Moses. So Aaron said, "Aaron, I want to reach through this page." He said, "Aaron, don't do it!" So Aaron said, "Take the gold rings from the ears of your wives and sons and daughters and bring them to me." And all the people took the gold rings from their ears and brought them to Aaron. And Aaron took the gold, melted it down, molded it into the shape of a calf. Now keep in mind, this was Aaron's idea. Aaron actually did the work. When the people saw it, they exclaimed, "O Israel, these are the gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Aaron saw how excited the people were. So does he put a tamper on it? No. He says, let's build an altar in front of the calf. He announced, "Tomorrow will be a festival to the Lord, not the Lord that led him out of Egypt," the ridiculous gold calf. Let's have a festival. So people got up early the next morning because, if you're going to have a festival, you got to have an early start. They got up early the next morning to sacrifice burnt offerings and peace offerings. And after this, they celebrated with feasting and drinking, and they indulged in pagan revelry. I had to look that up. What is pagan revelry? Well, there was feasting. There was dancing. There was drinking. And there was festive behavior. If you want to get an idea about exactly what this kind of looked like, skip down to verse 25. Moses saw that Aaron had let the people get completely out of control, much to the amusement of their enemies. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people acting like fools. It was so bad that it was getting around to other towns. And they're going, "Have you seen what those Israelites are doing? They look ridiculous. Dancing around a gold calf, acting stupid. What's wrong with these people?" Where's all that coming from? It was coming from the flesh. Their flesh wanted food. So let's have a feast. Their flesh wanted something their eyes could see. Let's make a calf so we could actually see God. Not that the pillar of fire was something they couldn't see, but again, no short-term memory apparently. They wanted dancing. They wanted the revelry. They wanted to act like fools. They wanted to act crazy. Why? That's what the flesh wanted. The flesh was driving that, and that's where the temptation is coming from, is being driven by our flesh and what the flesh wants. What's our flesh? Flesh is the humanity. The next point. What is temptation? Temptation is the enticement to choose to do what our flesh desires, even though it is wrong. Enticement to choose. Not the choice itself, but the enticement to choose. Very clear distinction. There is no sin in temptation unless you're the one doing the tempting. Then, oh yes, very much a sin. Because if you are doing the tempting, you've already given in on your side. Your flesh has enticed you, and you gave up, and now you want somebody else to join you. Temptation is the enticement to choose. And that's a very interesting point. It is a choice. James 1:14 continues. Remember what James 1:14a, the first part of that, says. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. Temptation is that, you've heard of the carrot and stick approach. You dangle a carrot in front of a donkey, and that entices them to move forward. Well, temptation is that little carrot being dangled in front of us that entices us to move forward. Difference is, we're not dumb donkeys. We have free will. We have a choice that we can make. Let me give you an example. You might have heard that there's a lot of talk going around that crime is up. Okay. Regardless of the reason why, let's just suppose crime is up. So, I wanted to pick a relevant illustration. Let's suppose you're walking down the street and some guy points a gun at you and says, "Give me your wallet," or "Give me your purse." And you say, because you don't have superpowers, you're not bulletproof, and you're not carrying. So you say, "Here you go." He takes off. Did you give in to temptation? No, you were forced. You had no choice. Money's gone, but that's not because you sinned, because somebody else did. Now, on the other hand, instead of somebody approaching you with a face mask and a gun, it's a guy in a business suit. And he says, "Hey, I know about this great opportunity. You can have a $1,000 or 1,000% return on your investment. So if you just give me $1, I guarantee you will get $1,000 back. And if you give me $10, you get $10,000 back. You give me $100, you get $100,000 back. You give me $1,000, you can get $1 million back. Guaranteed. It is that sure." What's the opportunity? Here's the deal. I have this bridge. It's in Brooklyn, and I'm going to charge people to cross the bridge. And it's for sale. So all we need to do is buy the bridge, and then we have that money-making opportunity set for life. Well, of course, that's a scam. The Brooklyn Bridge is not for sale, never has been, and yet it has been sold more times than anybody can count. Why? Because people are conned. That's what temptation is. It's a con. Just like being robbed, you're still out money. It's gone. Here's the difference, though. In this case, you gave it. You made a choice to give it to someone. Now, they may have betrayed your trust. They may have fooled you. But what was motivating you? 1,000% return on my investment. Greed. That's one of the things that makes lotteries so successful. If I just put in $1 and buy myself a lottery ticket, I can get $45 million. That's quite a return. Except your chances of winning are 1 in how many million? Not good. But what drives that purchase? It's greed. It's temptation. You read about people who hit the lottery. They get it. And then you're at the local convenience store and you see all these lottery tickets. It's just $1. Temptation, temptation, temptation. And so you make the choice. And that's what it is. It is a choice. Pure and simple. Our flesh entices us to do what our flesh wants. And we choose to do it. That's where the sin comes in. That's when sin has an opportunity to grow, because when you make the choice to give into that temptation, sin grows, and as sin grows, it gives birth to death. Because the wages of sin are death. Proverbs 7:8 gives a wonderful example of a guy making a choice. He was crossing the street near the house of an immoral woman, strolling down the path by her house. Okay, just walking along. He knows there's an immoral woman over here. And so what does he do? I know. I'll get closer. And he gets closer. And then she says, hey. She's all dolled up and looking fantastic. And she says, guess what? My bed is made and it's covered in flowers and expensive perfumes. My husband's away. He's going to be gone for weeks. Took a bunch of money. He's gone. He's out of here. Come on to my house. And let us have some fun. And he goes, sure! Like the ox to slaughter. But he made that first choice by going over. He could have just kept going straight. But no, he crossed that street, got closer, and then she pops out, and he gives in.